The smell of burnt plastic filled the penthouse air like a funeral dirge for my dreams. I sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor of my tiny bedroom, sardine-can small, with a window that faced a brick wall, staring at the melted wires of my third-generation modem. The advanced processor inside had been fried deliberately, methodically, by someone who knew exactly when to flip the main circuit breaker in the hallway. This was the third time this month. My hands trembled, but not from fear. From the kind of cold, crystalline rage that only comes when you finally understand the full scope of someone's malice. I heard footsteps in the hallway, deliberately loud, deliberately theatrical. Then she appeared in my doorway like a guillotine descending. Willow Vance. My older sister didn't walk into rooms. She materialized in them, commanding the space with the unconscious grace of someone who'd never been told no. She was dressed impeccably, crisp white silk shirt, tailored black blazer, her blonde hair styled in waves that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She looked like a judge about to deliver a guilty verdict. Her lips curved into a smile that contained no warmth. "Look at you, Anya," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "On the floor again with your little toys." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat had closed. 30 seconds earlier, I'd been on a video call with TechCorp Solutions, presenting my code architecture for a $10,000 contract, the biggest of my career. I'd been mid-sentence, confident, about to close the deal. Then the internet had died. Just died. And when I'd rushed to my window, I'd seen Willow in the hallway, her hand still resting on the circuit breaker with the satisfied smile of a predator. She snatched the check from my desk, my entire month's earnings, $3,200, before I could react. The paper crinkled between her manicured fingers. "You'll never be anything more than a glorified secretary trying to beg for scraps," she said, and every word was a blade. "You'll never own property because you lack basic hustle. You lack the vision that I have. But you know what? You do have a certain utility." She held the check up to the light, as if it were a work of art. "This utility. That's my rent," I said quietly. The words came out hollow. "Exactly." She smiled. That smile haunts me still. "And now, you owe me a new technology fee on top of this. Another $1,000. Your equipment damaged the electrical system. Very negligent." The door closed behind her with the soft finality of a coffin lid. I sat there in the darkness of that brick-walled room, surrounded by the ruins of my modem, and something inside me shifted. It wasn't a decision, exactly. It was a reckoning. A moment where the prey finally looks the predator in the eye and asks, "What if I'm not prey at all?" My name is Anya Grace Vance, and I am 27 years old. For 2 years, 730 days to be exact, this apartment has been my prison. Every month, like clockwork, I transfer $3,200 from my coding contracts into Willow's bank account. Every month, I remain trapped in a bedroom the size of a luxury car, with walls so thin I can hear the neighbor's television through the plaster. I am a talented programmer. Not competent. Not adequate. Talented. I taught myself to code at 16 using library computers and YouTube tutorials. By 22, I was pulling in 6-figure contracts from Fortune 500 companies. I've built machine learning algorithms that process millions of data points. I've written code that's elegant, efficient, beautiful in the way that only code can be, a perfect marriage of logic and creativity. But none of that matters when you're paying $3,200 a month to live in a 120-square-foot bedroom in a city where a studio apartment costs $2,800. The math is simple. I work 14-hour days, and my money disappears into Willow's pockets. Willow, the beautiful, narcissistic golden child, the one our mother Cecilia favored from the moment of her birth, is a master of subtle abuse. Not the kind that leaves bruises. The kind that erodes your sense of reality like water on stone. She controls every utility in the condo. She schedules emergency repairs at exactly the moments when I have major video calls scheduled. She forgets to pay the internet bill, then coincidentally discovers it hours before my deadlines. She hires electricians to fix the power, then unplugs my equipment and claims it was a technical failure. She performs these sabotages with the precision of a surgeon and the conscience of a shark. Our mother, Cecilia, always the referee, never the protector, sides with Willow every single time. Anya, perhaps you should be more independent, she suggests gently when I mention the power failures. Maybe if you were more organized. The subtext is always clear. This is your fault. You're the problem. The worst part? It worked. For 2 years, it worked. I started to believe her. I started to think that maybe I was a failure, that maybe the universe was telling me something, that maybe I'd never own property because I lacked whatever magical quality Willow possessed. My dream of a small house, just 4 walls that were actually mine, a place where no one could sabotage my internet or cut my power or extract money from me for the privilege of suffering, had become a fantasy. A fairy tale I told myself at 2 a.m. when I couldn't sleep because of the sounds from the rest of the condo. But that was before the modem burned. The moment everything changed was the moment I stopped being angry and started being curious. Anger, I'd learned, was Willow's currency. She fed on it. When I raged at her, she could diminish my fury with a smile and a cutting remark. But curiosity? Curiosity was a different animal entirely. Curiosity was patient. Curiosity didn't rage. Curiosity simply asked questions. I retrieved the melted wires from the floor and turned them over in my hands. The pattern of the burn damage told a story, if you knew how to read it. The copper traces didn't show random electrical surge. They showed deliberate, calculated voltage manipulation. Willow hadn't just flipped the breaker. She'd done something more sophisticated. I forced myself to breathe. My face must have been pale, but my hands were steady. I'd learned something important watching Willow for 2 years. She respected only one thing: power. She didn't respect tears or anger or moral arguments. But she would respect cold, undeniable fact. I needed to understand what was really happening here. Not just the surface abuse, but the why underneath it. Willow had never worked a day in her life. She didn't have a job. She spent her days planning dinner parties and managing a consulting business that seemed to consist entirely of her talking on the phone while looking important. Yet she lived in a downtown penthouse condo, wore designer clothes, and could somehow afford to absorb my $3,200 rent into her lifestyle without apparent strain. Where was the money coming from? And more importantly, why was she so desperate to keep me trapped and broken that she'd risk getting caught sabotaging my equipment multiple times? These questions spiraled through my mind like a vortex, pulling me down into a rabbit hole I wasn't sure I'd emerge from. But I had to know. If I didn't know, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering if Willow was right. If I didn't know, I'd never be free. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. My first step was establishing undeniable proof. I couldn't rely on my own observations anymore. Willow had successfully made me doubt my own mind. I needed something external, something scientific, something that couldn't be explained away by our mother or dismissed by Willow's clever manipulation. I used my backup savings, the money I'd hidden from Willow in a separate bank account, to purchase a power logger. It's a small, sophisticated device used by electricians to monitor electrical circuits. It records every surge, every dip, every outage, every manual intervention in nanosecond precision. I installed it deep inside my wall socket, hiding the digital readout behind a picture frame. Then I waited. The next few weeks were a living hell masquerading as normalcy. I'd wake up knowing that at some point during my workday, the power would fail, or the internet would drop, or the water pressure would suddenly vanish. But every time, the power logger captured data, precise, undeniable data. It created a record that no one could argue with. The outages weren't random. They happened every single time Willow was home. They happened during high-stakes calls with clients. They happened when I was processing large code compilations that couldn't be interrupted. They happened with such perfect timing that it couldn't possibly be coincidence. The pattern was unmistakable. Willow was deliberately sabotaging my work. But more than that, the power logger revealed something else. The electrical disruptions weren't just flipping a breaker. They showed sophisticated manipulation of the circuit itself. Whoever was doing this knew exactly how much voltage to send through the system to destroy sensitive electronics without triggering the safety shutoffs. Willow was an artist of cruelty. And now I had proof. The digital evidence was beautiful in its clarity. When I downloaded the data and saw it visualized in graphs, each spike a moment of sabotage, each manual trip a timestamp of malice, I felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't satisfaction. It was something more dangerous: clarity. Willow wasn't just controlling me out of general cruelty. This was targeted, deliberate, strategic. She knew exactly how vital my coding work was to my independence. She understood that in the digital age, a programmer without reliable internet and power is like a surgeon without hands. She was systematically destroying the very thing I needed to escape her. But why? What was she afraid of? What would happen to Willow if I became financially independent? The answer to that question would require me to look beyond the immediate abuse and see the larger architecture of her world. I needed to understand the foundation that supported her lifestyle, because I had a growing suspicion that the foundation was rotten. That suspicion came from a single, tiny detail: Willow had never mentioned the mortgage. In 2 years of living here, I'd never heard her discuss paying for the condo. She'd never complained about a mortgage payment. She'd never discussed refinancing or property taxes or any of the 1,000 logistical details that homeowners obsess about. The condo simply existed. And somehow, Willow's $3,200 rent from me was supposed to make that existence possible. Which meant either, A, the condo was paid off entirely, which seemed impossible on zero income, or B, someone else was paying for it. And that was when I realized I needed to know what that $3,200 was really paying for. My second move was riskier than the first. I couldn't hide behind legitimate reasons to investigate the condo. This required actual subterfuge. Late one night, when Willow was out at one of her dinner parties, I opened my laptop and began searching public records. County assessor websites are remarkably open. They're designed for transparency, for people to understand property ownership and tax obligations in their communities. I started with the basic information: the condo's address. The address was easy to find. But the ownership structure was strange. The deed wasn't listed under Willow Vance. It was listed under the name Greenleaf Properties Trust. I read that name 3 times. The letters seemed to rearrange themselves on my screen each time I looked at them, as if they were playing tricks on me. A trust. Not a personal residence deed. A trust. Why would Willow use a blind trust for a personal residence? Trusts were typically used for complex family arrangements, for tax purposes, for protecting assets from creditors. But a downtown condo? That made no sense. Unless Willow wasn't the actual owner. Unless someone else had created this structure to hold the property. Unless Willow was a beneficiary, not the owner. That single possibility cracked the entire foundation of her power over me. If the condo wasn't hers, then her authority to charge me rent was compromised. Her ability to control me through threats of eviction was leverage on sand. I dug deeper, searching for any public information about Greenleaf Properties Trust. The internet gave me fragments: legal notices, property tax records, deed transfers from decades ago. Then I found it, a small, barely noticed legal notice from 5 years prior. The original trustee was listed as George Vance. My grandfather. Deceased 5 years ago. My grandfather George was the only person in my entire family who ever truly saw me. He wasn't warm in the conventional sense. He was a quiet man, precise and analytical, with silver hair and hands that moved with the careful intention of someone who'd spent a lifetime working with fine things. He was a structural engineer, someone who understood how buildings stayed standing, how foundations supported weight, how systems worked together to create something stable. He used to sit with me in his study when I was young and let me watch him work. He'd explain the calculations, the stress tests, the way that tiny adjustments in support beams could mean the difference between a building that lasted a century and one that crumbled in a decade. The invisible things matter most, he used to say, pointing at blueprints. Everyone sees the walls. But the walls are nothing without what's underneath. When I taught myself to code, Grandfather George was the only one who understood what I was doing. He'd sit beside me and listen while I explained algorithms and data structures, and instead of looking confused or dismissive, like Cecilia, like Willow, he'd nod thoughtfully and ask intelligent questions. He treated my coding the way he treated his engineering, as a serious, sophisticated craft that required both intellect and integrity. My grandmother had always hinted, in her vague, passive way, that Grandfather George had left something special for me. "Your grandfather always said you were destined for great things, darling," she'd murmur at family dinners. But Cecilia and Willow had dismissed it as the rambling of an old man who'd been fading toward dementia. "He didn't know what he was talking about," Willow had said with her trademark dismissiveness. "Anya's just a tech worker. It's not that special." I never pursued it. I was grieving. I was young. And honestly, I didn't believe it could be anything meaningful. I was wrong. The Greenleaf Properties Trust document itself was sealed. I couldn't access it without being named as a beneficiary, which I clearly wasn't on any official record. But the public tax records were different. Property tax bills are open information, recorded in county databases, searchable by anyone with an internet connection and 5 minutes. I found the property tax bill for the Greenleaf Trust within 30 seconds. The number made me gasp out loud. The annual property taxes on the downtown penthouse condo were $18,400 per year. That was higher than most people's annual mortgage payments. And when I traced the payment history through the county records, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The taxes were months delinquent. 6 months, to be exact. The county website displayed a warning in bold red text. "The owner of this property has been notified that failure to pay property taxes within 90 days will result in a tax lien. The property may be subject to foreclosure and auction if payment is not received immediately." I sat back from my laptop and let the implications wash over me. Everything suddenly made sense. The reason Willow needed my $3,200 a month. The reason she was so desperate to keep me trapped and compliant. The reason she charged me rent on a condo that wasn't actually hers. She was drowning. Not in credit card debt or failed business ventures, though those probably existed too. She was drowning in property taxes on an asset she couldn't afford. And she was using my rent payments to keep the debt manageable, to keep the bank and the county at bay, to maintain the illusion that she was a successful woman of property. My $3,200 a month, paid with tears and sabotaged work and broken dreams, was a band-aid on a hemorrhaging wound. Willow needed me. Not because she loved me. Not even because she wanted to control me, exactly. She needed me because without me, the entire structure of her lie collapsed. The delinquent tax bill was a portal into a hidden world. With 6 months of missed payments, the county wasn't going to wait much longer. The warning on the public record made that clear. There was a specific legal process for property tax foreclosure. The county would issue a formal tax lien, place the property into the foreclosure auction system, and sell it to the highest bidder at a public auction. The original owner, or in this case, the beneficiary of the trust, would lose all claim to the property unless back taxes were paid in full, plus penalties and interest. I calculated the numbers: 6 months of unpaid taxes, plus accumulated penalties, plus county administrative fees. We were looking at approximately $32,000 in total debt. And Willow didn't have it. That was the crushing realization that explained everything. Willow had discovered, or inherited knowledge of, this property through the trust structure. She'd maneuvered herself into a position where she had use and benefit of the condo without actually being the listed owner. She'd convinced our mother to go along with whatever paperwork was necessary. And she'd convinced me to pay rent, month after month, while she funneled that money into a desperate, doomed effort to keep the property from being seized. She was like a person standing on a sinking ship, bailing water with a teaspoon and calling it progress. But I had a question that kept echoing through my mind. If the condo was going to be seized anyway, why hadn't it happened already? Why was the notice still a warning, not a foreclosure filing? The answer was in the trust document itself. I just needed to see it. I knew I needed to see the full trust document. It was the only way to understand the complete architecture of what had happened. Not just why Willow needed the money, but what actual legal right she had to the property. And more importantly, whether I had any claim to it myself. My only lead was a memory from childhood. Grandfather George had a habit, almost a ritual, of keeping his most important legal documents in a safe deposit box at a small, independent bank 3 hours outside the city. He'd mention it occasionally in the way that old people do. "I've taken care of things, Anya. It's all in the box." I'd never quite understood what things meant. On a Wednesday afternoon, I told Willow I had a coding conference to attend. It was the kind of lie that felt almost natural now, small, defensive, the kind of lie you tell to protect yourself from someone who's determined to hurt you. I drove 3 hours through rain-slicked highways to the town where my grandparents had maintained their rural property. The bank was exactly as I remembered it, small, quiet, family-owned, the kind of institution that still existed in a world increasingly dominated by corporate financial empires. I presented myself to the bank manager, an older woman with kind eyes and a wedding ring that had clearly been worn for 40 years, with my photo ID, my grandfather's death certificate, and the publicly listed trust name, Greenleaf Properties Trust. The manager was kind but firm. "Access is only granted to the named executor, I'm afraid. Or the beneficiaries, if they have documentation from the attorney managing the estate. Do you have such documentation?" I felt the familiar wave of defeat beginning to crest. But then something my grandfather had taught me surfaced from memory: how to spot a fake signature. He'd been paranoid about financial fraud, determined that I should never be taken advantage of. He'd spent an entire afternoon showing me the subtle variations in pen pressure, the unique angle of letter formations, the microscopic details that made each signature genuinely unique. "I understand," I told the manager. "But I need to verify something. Could I see a copy of the executor's signature on the bank's account card? I have a family matter I'm handling, and I need to verify some paperwork for legal purposes." It was a common enough request, the kind of thing that happens all the time in bank business. The manager hesitated only briefly before pulling the file. She showed me the signature card. And my blood ran cold. The signature on the bank card wasn't Willow's. It was close, similar handwriting style, similar confidence in the pen strokes. But it was distinctly different. The loop in the W was too wide. The angle of the lowercase letters was slightly different. The pressure was different. It was my mother's signature. Cecilia. Not Willow. My mother was the named executor of the trust. I stared at the signature card, my mind spinning. The pieces started to fall into place with a sick, heavy sensation. Willow hadn't discovered the trust independently. Willow had access to it because our mother, Cecilia, had given her access. They'd worked together, conspired together, to keep the property and the trust itself hidden from me. This was a deeper betrayal than anything Willow had ever done to me. Willow was a narcissist, yes. But Cecilia was my mother. She was supposed to be the adult in the room, the one who looked out for her daughters, especially the younger one who was being tormented. Instead, she'd actively participated in the torment. "Thank you for showing me," I told the manager, my voice steadier than I felt. "I think I have what I need." I drove back to the city in a daze, my hands tight on the steering wheel, my mind working through the legal implications of what I'd discovered. I needed professional help. I needed someone who understood trust law, someone who could explain the mechanics of what Cecilia and Willow had done, someone who could tell me if there was any way to break through the walls they'd built. I needed Julian. Julian Chun was my former professor from community college. The only instructor I'd ever had who treated me like I had a future worth investing in. After I'd started earning real money with my coding, he'd left his job at a large corporate firm and opened his own practice, Chen and Associates, specializing in financial litigation and estate law. He'd always told me that if I ever needed help, he was there. I was about to take him up on that offer. When I called his office, I half expected to be told he was too busy, that his services were too expensive for someone in my situation. Instead, he told me to come by that evening. He listened to my story without interruption, his sharp eyes growing sharper as I explained about the power logger, the county records, the delinquent taxes, and the signature mismatch at the bank. "This is bigger than sabotage," he said when I finished. "This is estate fraud. Your mother and your sister have essentially stolen property from the trust, and more importantly from you if I'm reading this correctly. Can you get me the trust name and all the public documents you've found?" I spent the next hour downloading and organizing everything. Property tax records, deed transfers, county foreclosure notices, the signature card from the bank. When I finished, Julian leaned back in his chair and let out a long, low whistle. Okay, he said. Here's what I think happened. Your grandfather created the Greenleaf Properties Trust as a way to hold the condo outside of his personal estate. Trusts have benefits, tax advantages, privacy, the ability to designate specific beneficiaries. When he died, he presumably named beneficiaries in the trust document. And my mother is the executor, I said. Yes. Which means she has certain responsibilities: maintaining the property, paying taxes, managing the asset according to the trust's terms. He pulled up the county website on his computer. These delinquent taxes are a serious problem. A 6-month delinquency doesn't happen by accident. And the fact that they're being paid partially, sporadically, month to month, suggests someone is trying to avoid triggering the full foreclosure process. My sister, I said quietly. She's using my rent to pay them. Partially, yes. But here's the thing. Julian turned his screen toward me. Property tax foreclosures are governed by specific legal provisions. If the primary administrator defaults on taxes for 6 consecutive months, most trust documents include a failure to maintain clause. It's a legal mechanism to transfer control of the asset if the current administrator proves unable to manage it properly. I felt something shift in my chest. Meaning, Julian said carefully, that if your mother or sister has defaulted for 6 months, and if the trust documents specify an alternative beneficiary, then control of the property could theoretically transfer to that beneficiary, regardless of what your mother or sister want. Who's the alternative beneficiary? I asked, though something in my gut already knew the answer. Julian smiled. That's what we need to find out. And to do that, we need to see the actual trust document. Getting access to the trust document was technically illegal if done the wrong way, but Julian was a careful man. He worked within the system, filing formal legal requests through the proper channels. 3 weeks later, we had it. The document was 30 pages long, dense with legal language, but Julian walked me through it step by step. The trust had been created by my grandfather in 1998, 10 years before his death. It established a complex framework for asset management, tax strategies, and succession planning. The primary beneficiary, the person with first claim on the assets, was designated as my grandmother for her lifetime, with succession to my eldest child or her designated representative. That was Cecilia. But then came the clause that made my breath catch. In the event that the primary administrator fails to maintain the property in accordance with trust provisions, including but not limited to timely payment of all property taxes and municipal liens, control of the asset shall transfer automatically to the secondary beneficiary, provided the secondary beneficiary satisfies all outstanding debt within 30 days of notification. And the secondary beneficiary was listed as the younger daughter, Anya Grace Vance, upon reaching the age of 25, provided she demonstrates financial responsibility and independent means. I was the secondary beneficiary. The property could be mine, if I could satisfy the debt that Willow had accrued. This changes everything, Julian said softly. This changes absolutely everything. Julian spent the next week building the case. He worked with meticulous precision, documenting every angle, every legal precedent, every possible defense that Willow and Cecilia might raise against what we were about to do. They're going to argue that you're a tenant, not a beneficiary, he explained. They're going to produce the rent checks you've written and claim you have no legal standing to challenge the trust structure. They'll argue that the $3,200 monthly payments constitute acceptance of your status as a renter, not an heir. But I'm not a tenant, I said. I'm not even on a lease agreement. Exactly, Julian nodded. Which means those rent payments are essentially gifts to Willow, with no legal documentation supporting a tenant-landlord relationship. That actually works in your favor. It shows that Willow has been accepting money from you under false pretenses, claiming the authority to charge rent on a property she doesn't actually own. So what do we do? I asked. Julian's smile was the smile of a man who'd just solved a puzzle he'd been working on for days. We do what your grandfather intended. We satisfy the debt, trigger the failure to maintain clause, and transfer the asset to its rightful beneficiary. We pay the delinquent taxes, I said slowly. You pay the delinquent taxes, he corrected. All $32,000 of them. Plus penalties and interest. The moment that payment is made and recorded with the county, it triggers an automatic legal review of the trust's status. The county will notify the attorney managing the estate. And once the attorney understands what's happened, they'll have no choice but to initiate the transfer of the asset from your mother as primary beneficiary to you as secondary beneficiary. Willow's going to lose her mind, I whispered. Willow's going to lose her house, Julian said with quiet satisfaction. Which is exactly what she deserves. I had exactly $32,400 in my savings account. It was money I'd earned working 14-hour days, code written in the dark hours of early morning before Willow woke up, algorithms debugged while my sister slept. It was money I'd been saving for a down payment on a house of my own, a dream I'd kept alive even when Willow was doing everything in her power to kill it. Using that money to pay off her tax debt felt like every rational bone in my body was screaming in protest. But Julian had explained why it was necessary. The failure to maintain clause requires proof that you, the secondary beneficiary, can satisfy the debt immediately. This isn't a hypothetical. You need actual, documented payment. And you need it done before the county issues the formal tax lien. I made the payment on a Tuesday morning, alone in my room, the door locked against the world. I transferred the entire amount through a separate escrow account, a neutral third party that would process the payment to the county without revealing my involvement. On the payment form, I listed the beneficiary entity, Greenleaf Properties Trust, tax ID 44-8873652. My name appeared nowhere on the documentation. The county processed the payment within hours. By afternoon, the tax records had been updated, the delinquent property tax debt was satisfied, penalties were waived due to the escrow arrangement, and the account status was marked current and paid in full. I watched the county website update in real time, my hands shaking as I refreshed the page over and over. It was happening. It was actually happening. And Willow had no idea. What happened next moved with the inexorable logic of a machine that's been set in motion and can't be stopped. The moment the property tax bill was marked paid, it triggered an automatic legal review in the county system. This was standard procedure. Large payments from third parties required administrative verification to ensure fraud hadn't occurred. The county reached out to the attorney listed as the trust's representative. That attorney, Margaret Winters, a 60-something woman with 3 decades of experience in estate law, had assumed the trust had been properly managed for the past 5 years. She had the sealed documents, the original filing, the detailed instructions from my grandfather's estate. She'd never heard from Willow or Cecilia. She'd simply filed the paperwork and collected her annual administrative fee. Suddenly, someone had paid $32,000 in property taxes through an escrow account. That was not normal. That required investigation. Margaret contacted her counterpart at the county, who explained the delinquency history: 6 months of unpaid taxes, accumulated penalties, warnings issued. Margaret's face must have gone pale. She immediately requested a full accounting from the trust's primary beneficiary, Cecilia. She wanted documentation proving all maintenance payments had been made, all taxes submitted, all obligations fulfilled. Cecilia couldn't provide it, because it didn't exist. 3 days later, Margaret reached out to Julian through formal legal channels. She believed she'd discovered evidence of fraud, specifically, misappropriation of trust assets by the primary administrator and other interested parties. She was, unknowingly, working directly into our plan. While the legal machinery was grinding forward, I was gathering the final piece of evidence that would destroy any remaining doubt. I planted a small, motion-activated camera on a shelf in the hallway, positioned to capture the main electrical panel, the circuit breaker box where Willow had sabotaged my equipment so many times before. 2 days later, at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday, I received a text message from the security app, motion detected. I opened the video footage immediately. There she was, Willow, walking past the electrical panel in her work-from-home outfit, pausing deliberately, and reaching out to the main circuit breaker. Her face was turned toward the camera just enough that I could see her expression, that same satisfied smile, the expression of a predator about to feed. She flipped the breaker switch. The timestamp showed 3:47 p.m. I checked my calendar. At exactly 3:47 p.m., I'd been on a video call with a tech company reviewing my code portfolio. The call had ended abruptly when the power went out. I'd lost that client. Now I had it on video. I sent the footage to Julian immediately, marked it Exhibit B sabotage evidence, and added it to the growing legal file. Margaret Winters was a thorough woman, the kind of attorney who'd built a reputation on dotting every I and crossing every T. She opened a formal investigation into the trust's management. She requested bank statements showing where the monthly maintenance fees had gone. She found statements showing that while money had been transferred from the trust account to Cecilia, Cecilia had immediately redistributed it. Some to Willow's personal account, some to pay down Willow's credit cards, some to fund an online fashion venture that had apparently lost money every single month for 2 years. She requested documentation of property maintenance and repairs. She found invoices for work that had never been performed, electrician's bills that didn't match actual service calls, phantom contractors hired and paid but never actually appearing at the address. She requested evidence of tax payments. She found 6 months of nothing. No payments. No good faith partial payments. Just a complete absence of responsibility. The picture that emerged was devastating. Willow and Cecilia had systematically stripped the trust, used its assets for personal benefit, and allowed a critical financial obligation to deteriorate while the property slipped closer to foreclosure. It was textbook breach of fiduciary duty. And Margaret Winters, now determined, contacted Julian's firm. She believed she'd uncovered a third-party fraudster attempting to take advantage of the trust's dysfunction. She had no idea that Julian was working for the one person who could actually fix it. "They'll think I'm the criminal," I said when Julian explained the situation. "Only for about 5 minutes," he smiled. "Once the trust attorney sees your connection to the secondary beneficiary clause, everything reverses. You become the solution, not the problem." When Margaret Winters discovered that the mysterious escrow payment came from me, through careful documentation that Julian helped her trace, she went very quiet. Then she called Julian directly. "I believe I've been investigating the wrong angle," she said, and I could hear the recalibration happening in her voice. "Your client is Anya Vance." "She is," Julian confirmed. "She's the secondary beneficiary." "She is." She satisfied the delinquent tax obligation within 30 days of discovering the trust's status. "Correct." There was a long pause. "I need to prepare the documentation for asset transfer." By the time Willow received the legal notification, the foundation of her entire world had crumbled into dust. The notice was simple, formal, devastating. "This office has determined that a failure to maintain triggering event occurred with respect to the Greenleaf Properties Trust. Specifically, property taxes were in delinquent status for more than 6 consecutive months. In accordance with the trust document dated 1998 and properly executed by Trustee George Vincent Vance, control of the trust asset, located at 1247 Downtown Terrace, Unit 42, shall transfer from the primary beneficiary to the secondary beneficiary effective immediately upon satisfaction of all outstanding obligations. The secondary beneficiary, Anya Grace Vance, has satisfied all outstanding obligations as of March 14, 2024. Transfer of deed is pending final legal review." The hearing was scheduled for exactly 1 week later. I knew the moment I saw her face. Willow called me that evening, and her voice was like shattered glass. "You did this," she screamed. "You did this, you pathetic rat. I know you paid those taxes somehow. But the house is mine, and you are still paying me rent tomorrow." Her panic was so complete, so absolute, that for just a moment I felt something that scared me more than anger ever had. I felt pity. This was who Willow really was beneath the silk and designer clothes and perfect hair. Not a strong woman. A woman clinging to a fantasy of herself, terrified that if she let go, she'd discover there was nothing underneath. I listened to her screaming, my phone resting against my ear, and I didn't say a single word. That silence was worse than any argument. That silence was the sound of everything she'd built crashing down. "Anya." Her voice changed, became smaller. "Are you there? What did you do? What did you do?" I hung up. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Not grand, not dramatic, just a functional space with wood paneling and harsh fluorescent lights. The judge was a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and the expression of someone who'd seen enough human dysfunction to fill an encyclopedia. Willow arrived dressed like a corporate executive, sharp suit, perfect hair, makeup flawless. But her hands trembled slightly as she set down her briefcase. Cecilia sat behind her, wearing the expression of a woman who'd made a catastrophic calculation and was only now understanding the scope of her mistake. Julian stood beside me, calm and professional, a legal file arranged in front of him with the precision of a surgeon arranging instruments. Margaret Winters sat at the other table, representing the trust's interests, which, once the secondary beneficiary was recognized, meant representing me. The judge reviewed the case summary. She read Margaret's investigation. She looked at the evidence, the property tax delinquencies, the fraudulent documentation, the escrow payment that had triggered the failure to maintain clause. Then she looked at the video footage. On the courtroom monitor, crystal clear in digital high definition, everyone watched Willow reach out and deliberately flip the circuit breaker that had sabotaged my income-producing work. I saw Willow's face drain of color. "Your Honor," Julian began, standing with calm authority, "the defendant, Willow Vance, has operated under a false assumption for the past 2 years. She has charged my client, Anya Vance, $3,200 monthly in rent while claiming to own a property that she does not actually own. She has systematically sabotaged my client's work, as documented in this video evidence and the electrical circuit logs. And she has conspired with the trust's primary beneficiary, Cecilia Vance, to misappropriate trust assets. However," he continued, "there is a more fundamental issue. The Greenleaf Properties Trust contains a specific provision, a failure to maintain clause. When the primary administrator defaults on property tax obligations for 6 consecutive months, the trust assets transfer automatically to the secondary beneficiary, provided that beneficiary can satisfy the outstanding debt. My client, Anya Vance, is the secondary beneficiary, and she has satisfied all outstanding debt." He placed the documentation on the judge's bench. The deed transfer forms, the tax payment records, the escrow documentation. "Therefore," Julian concluded, "we petition this court to recognize the automatic transfer of the property to Ms. Anya Vance and to issue a formal order of possession." The judge looked at Willow, gave her the opportunity to respond, and watched as Willow opened her mouth and closed it again, no words emerging. What could she say? The facts were undeniable. The law was clear. She had lost. The judge's ruling took exactly 7 minutes to deliver. "I find that the failure to maintain clause has been properly triggered. I find that the secondary beneficiary has satisfied all outstanding obligations. I find that the property shall be transferred to Anya Grace Vance, effective immediately. The defendant, Willow Vance, is ordered to vacate the premises within 48 hours. I further note that there appear to be grounds for criminal charges related to fraud and sabotage, which I'm referring to the district attorney's office. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down with the finality of a period at the end of a sentence. Willow stood up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Her face was a study in fury and humiliation. She looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. A combination of rage and something almost worse, the realization that she'd completely miscalculated who I was. I wasn't the intimidated younger sister she'd worked so hard to break. I was someone who'd built a foundation while she was busy destroying her own. Cecilia followed her out of the courtroom without looking at me. Julian squeezed my shoulder. "You did it, Anya. You actually did it." But I wasn't feeling triumph yet. I was feeling something more complex, the strange hollow sensation that comes when you finally get justice and realize it doesn't taste the way you thought it would. I had 48 hours before Willow had to leave. I didn't go to the condo that night. Instead, I went home, to the shelter I'd been staying at while the legal case was ongoing, a small room that cost a quarter of what Willow charged me but had one critical advantage: it was actually mine. The next morning, I called a friend who owned a moving company. By afternoon, when I finally went to the condo, Willow was already gone. Her things were piled in the hallway, designer luggage, boxes of clothes, the trappings of a life that had been built on a foundation of stolen trust and deliberate cruelty. But the condo itself was exactly as it had always been. The penthouse space with floor-to-ceiling windows, the modern kitchen, the rooms that had been closed off to me for 2 years. All of it was mine. I stood in the center of the living room and let the reality of it wash over me. This was real. This was actually real. I walked into the kitchen and opened cabinets that I'd never been allowed to open. I walked into the master bedroom, Willow's room, and stood in the morning light streaming through windows I'd only seen from my tiny prison cell. Then I walked to my old bedroom. And I saw something that broke my heart a little. On my desk, which Willow had left behind when she evacuated her life, was a note written in her precise, furious handwriting. You think you're so clever. You think you won. But you'll never have what I have. You'll never be what I am. And now everyone knows you're a bitter, conniving little rat who stole her sister's house. Congratulations on being a criminal. Love, Willow. I picked up the note, read it once, and then I burned it in the sink. I was done with her narrative. The condo required a tremendous amount of work. Willow had let it deteriorate, using it purely as an income source and a statement of status. The electrical systems needed to be completely rewired. The plumbing was outdated. The HVAC system was on its last legs. The carpet was stained. The walls needed painting. But I loved every second of the restoration work. For the first time in my life, I was building something that was entirely, completely mine. No one could sabotage it. No one could take it away. No one could charge me rent to live in my own space. I used my coding income to fund the repairs. New wiring, new fixtures, new appliances. I painted my old prison cell in soft blues and created a home office with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and windows facing the city. I installed a backup power system and 3 different internet providers. I made it impossible for anyone to ever sabotage my work again. While I was renovating, I discovered something in the walls, a letter, carefully sealed in a waterproof envelope. It was from my grandfather. The letter was dated 2 months before his death. The handwriting was shaky but still precise, still the handwriting of a man who understood the importance of clarity. Anya, it read, if you're reading this, it means I've moved on from this world, and you're old enough to have discovered what I left for you. I want you to understand something. I created the trust not as an inheritance, but as a foundation. Structures are built on foundations, and the best foundations are the ones people don't see. They do their work invisible, supporting everything above them. Your mother and your sister will try to use this property as leverage. They're going to tell you stories about why they deserve it more than you do. Don't listen. You deserve it because you're the one who will appreciate it. You're the one who will build something meaningful with it. I've watched you grow, and I see something in you that I see in myself, the ability to understand systems, to recognize patterns, to build things that matter. Don't ever let anyone convince you that those gifts are worthless. The house is yours, Anya. Not as a gift, but as a foundation. Build something beautiful on top of it. I cried when I finished reading the letter. Not tears of sadness, but tears that felt like a dam breaking. 2 years of suppressed grief, 2 years of self-doubt, 2 years of being told I was nothing finally releasing. My grandfather had seen me. He'd believed in me. And he'd built a structure to protect me, even after death, even after I'd forgotten to believe in myself. 6 months after winning the case, I was sitting in my new home office, overlooking the city, surrounded by the soft hum of 5 redundant power systems and 3 different fiber internet connections, when I received the news. The district attorney had filed charges against Willow for fraud, for sabotaging my business contracts, for theft of services. Cecilia had agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity. Willow had left the city. I didn't track her down. I didn't need to. She'd made her choice, and I'd made mine. The story between us was over. I stood at the window of the condo that I'd paid for twice over, once in rent and once in emotional damage, and I thought about my grandfather's words. Build something beautiful. So that's what I did. I converted one of the spare bedrooms into a scholarship fund administration office. Through the website, I began offering coding mentorships to young people in underprivileged communities. Kids who reminded me of myself at 16, teaching myself to code on library computers, desperate to escape their circumstances. With my coding income, I started a small nonprofit. I funded scholarships. I taught workshops. I built a community of programmers who understood that sometimes the real work isn't about the code itself. It's about the foundation you build to support those who come after you. The irony wasn't lost on me. Willow had charged me $3,200 a month because she believed I'd never own property. She tried to keep me dependent because she was terrified of a world where I was independent and powerful. Instead, she'd catalyzed exactly that transformation. I walked through my condo on a Sunday morning, watching the sunlight stream through windows that had suddenly become my own, and I felt the deepest sense of peace I'd ever known. Not the peace of revenge, that had been short-lived and hollow, but the peace of having built something real. I had paid $3,200 a month for 2 years. I had paid $32,000 in delinquent taxes. In total, I'd spent $108,000 to walk away from my prison and into my inheritance. But what I'd really paid for was something far more valuable: my freedom, my integrity, and the poetic justice of proving that the quiet sister, the overlooked coder, the one they said would never be anything, had become everything they'd tried so desperately to prevent. I'd paid for the truth to come out. I'd paid for justice to prevail. And most importantly, I'd paid for the privilege of never having to listen to Willow's voice again. Outside my window, the city glittered in the morning light. Inside my sanctuary, surrounded by the hum of systems I'd designed and built myself, I opened my laptop and got to work. There was code to write. There were students to mentor. There was a future to build, one line of logic at a time. The contract was clear. I now owned this place, not just the deed but the story that came with it. And I was going to write the ending myself. If you've made it this far, you understand, respect is non-negotiable. My worth wasn't defined by Willow's sneers or the $3,200 rent I paid. My story proves that silence was the weapon I needed to find the trust documents and expose her digital sabotage. If this resonated, share it with someone who's been gaslit into invisibility. Tell them, your survival makes you extraordinary. Your boundaries don't make you difficult. The revolution happens when you decide to write your own ending. My worth was never in question. It was waiting for me to legally claim the home that was always meant to be mine. Have you had to prove your worth to a family that underestimated your intelligence? Share your story below and don't forget to like and subscribe.